Hello, Internet, and welcome to another Wednesday serial. This time I'm talking about a big old chunk at the end of this Green Lantern run. So, when we left off, we were kind of entering a new phase for Kyle. You know, we had gotten past our chunk with Mars. Rab had taken over and done those excellent handful of issues that I don't know, in a weird way, established a lot for Kyle about me just because it was like in different hands, but showing that he's a competent, full character. And then we get Winnick, who starts off, and I love this cover, even though it's just a bunch of heads and whatnot, but it kind of shows a little bit of his placement. We're getting a full establishment with side characters with Winnick's early days, where he's fighting manhunters again. But what we find is that as he's fighting manhunters, and I'll get to this in a second, Fatale, and dealing with the OG Green Lantern, we're seeing an interesting shift in the comic where the super heroics become, it's the A plot, but it's much reduced. And it becomes infinitely a lot more of a soap drama. We're focusing on Jen and the fact that he's friends with her dad as well, but their relationships are almost separate. So we get some fun interplay there. We're dealing with John and Guy kind of being these weird mentor positions, but they're more removed and they feel like the older statesmen, and that's kind of interesting. He's part of the Justice League, and he kind of looks up to Superman, who that's going to play in a little bit, but and he really models after Superman. He kind of has a problem with Batman. Despite the fact that Superman and Batman are friends, there is kind of a method and mode in DC where heroes kind of tend to take a track of one of those two, or maybe after Wonder Woman, but in this case, obviously Superman. And then, yeah, we get the superheroics develop, the guy with the ability to fight off. And all this comes through. Fatale is a little annoying because that's really more John's deal, but yeah, he's dealing with them. Let's get to a chunk. We arrive at this fight, which ends up being a big deal because this. I'm sorry, I'm spacing out his name, but he has the Cordian ring, Sinestro's ring, basically. But he's a mental patient, he's insane, but due to his insanity and his force of will and belief of what he's thinking is right, he's actually a real big threat. And what's kind of cool about that is Kyle comes in and says, we might have to kill him. And the Justice League are like, we fought powerful people before and never issued a death warrant. And Kyle looks at his ring and basically says, do you know this thing can split an atom? It's not that it's hard, it's that it takes a fair amount of will to get that kind of focus. And the tune changes with them, and I think it was kind of a cool thing because as much as the Green Lantern has always been a part of the Justice League, I feel like the idea of the greatest weapon in the universe kind of took on some meaning with that line, and that kind of stuck with me as we move through. Like, as much as there are the big two, Green Lantern's a bigger player, or should be, but often dealing with his own thing and is just helping out the Justice League. So I really like that, and that resolves here, rather. And like I said, there's two issues there. Focus on the superheroics primarily. So we get this with Jen and him coming back, and it's a big thing for Kyle emotionally here because this comic's going to reverb all the way to the end of the run. This is when Jen and him really solidify. Like, he proposes, and she accepts. And so they're off in space together. And one thing I like is that they're off dealing with other things. This is really kind of fun because now that we have Winnick here, as much as he is focusing on the soap drama, he's also dealing with societal issues. And he's using the sci-fi scope of trying to show the idea of it through another example crafted by sci-fi. So in this case, he's looking at kind of the Israel-Palestine war, and reframing in the context of these people warring over a planet, making it a bit about resources, but you can tell that's what he's talking about because there's these religious beliefs that are held within it. And at the end of it, Kyle deals with the threat of the moment and kind of gets to a ceasefire for the moment. They know it's only for the moment. And then he says it's time to leave. And Jen just kind of looks at him like, well, we didn't fix the problem. And Kyle's saying, we only have the power to deal with the moment. We can't fix what's in their hearts. We can't stay here forever. And that's what it will take. There has to be a powerful presence to create a permanent ceasefire. We can't do it. It's a little defeatist, but it's also... there is something about it that rung with me in a certain way. And I don't love it, but it's interesting of storytelling that it's so elevated above where a lot of Green Lantern was. Then we get a bit with the old school and the new school sparring, talking about that, dealing with Jen. I don't know. It's fun. We get this bit with this build to Joker the Last Laugh. This tie-in actually does have some consequence, though it's annoying that it's this big DC event and Green Lantern's stuck with an issue dealing with it. So, here's where the big shift happens. Here, lots of energy, dealing with it. And he's dealing with Darkseid's son being Jokerized, and he's going to drop an atom bomb. And that's going to be a problem. So then he's a little energized, he's dealing with it. And then he deals with that character, that we saw in the mini that I was talking about last video, where it's this alien from across the universe that he helped conjure. And now they've kind of fully retconned, so there's no ambiguity. And it is Kyle who conjured the threat. But now that threat has interacted with the central power battery on Oa. And we're left with Kyle supercharged. Then we get a bit with John here, who's been paralyzed, and we realize due to Fatal talking to him that it's all in his head. He needs to get over it. And so we're dealing with that while Kyle's become Ion, which is talked about in the John's run and is handled a little differently there. Ion here is essentially Kyle Rayner as God, but without the weird God complex that these stories normally take with superhero. So he's dealing with Superman, and Kyle's gone beyond just dealing with crime. He's now helping with crops. He's now dealing with the world, and there's a big standoff with Superman, the character that he looks up to. That's why that was kind of resonant to me. And basically Kyle this entire time is saying, he hasn't losing himself, everybody's worried about him having too much power, but he's really just him. It's more of an ideological problem that they're having and dealing with, which again is great. I think that's where Green Lantern should be. There shouldn't be an underlining of utopian to it. If you go too dark with it, it loses its flavor and becomes more like Space Batman or something. Like, you need that... You need to be dealing with the ideas more so than you need to be dealing with the drama, I think, for the space sci-fi stuff. Ultimately, Kyle gives up the power because he realizes that Superman has a point when it's not that he's doing anything wrong, but the people start responding to him and they start treating him like a god. And that's when he sees, like, something shifted. Not that he's doing anything wrong, but that his actions have consequences that if he were to try to control, which he could, would actually only embolden those who are following him as a god, but then it would take a darker tone. So that's interesting. Though it is interesting that during this, that Palestine-like conflict I was talking about, he does actually deal with during that time. Also, as he's getting away from this, he changes the rules of the ring a little bit, so he doesn't have to worry about, like, charging it as much, I guess. Redesign it. And gives Jen her old powers back. So that's kind of cool. And we get this big rehash with 150. It's like a reigniting of Green Lantern, and we're kind of on our way to the Green Lantern Corps again, which is kind of cool. And Kyle gets a little bit of a redesign here. And I feel like once we're at this point, Kyle's fully come into his own. We're at 151. We're 100 issues past his initial real appearance. I mean, yeah. So we have that. We have, again, him kind of dealing with Scott. I don't know. And then we have a lighter issue of him dealing with the homecoming. And then we get the story that Winnick's been kind of wanting to tell and building to. His assistant that's been helping him with this new artist job that's been a plot going through Winnick's entire run comes up, and his assistant has discovered that he's gay. He's still relatively young, so I mean, it's all within there. And it's also very a 90s coming out gay story, which is told very differently than it would be told 2 generations after even. So there's that, but they play off kind of the Matthew Shepard idea, and he gets beaten to a pulp within an inch of his life. This is darker, but this is relevant social commentary at the time, so it's not... This isn't like the Major Force stuff. This is relevant and meaningful and interesting because it is so kind of like dark and earthly, which comes to Kyle deals with the guys who did this to him, but not with kind of encountering the Spectre, who's telling him to check his wrath, basically, which, considering if you know anything about the Spectre in the DC universe, that's pretty telling. And then we get to building to kind of a handoff. While Kyle's away, he asks John to take over as the JLA Green Lantern. And we get kind of a moment of John getting back on his feet, literally. And then we have a callback to a previous issue that was fun with kind of the female characters only. Jade comes back to Earth and is dealing with Killer Frost, and then her and Donna kind of have this one-on-one, and Kyle walks to talk in on them real quick. It's, I don't know, kind of interesting. And then we have this whole in-space bit. He's dealing with weird aliens and whatnot. They're fun issues, but nothing really stands out to the larger plot for a little bit, until we get to about here where Kyle's really starting to worry about reinitializing the Green Lantern Corps, and he has a vendetta to bring down the Black Circle, which is all brought up through the Black Circle arc. It's a Green Arrow, Green Lantern callback. It's a fairly big deal. I don't know, this is one of the few moments that I believe is a standout from this run, so it's more likely that you've read these issues than anything else I'm talking about. If you haven't, totally worth it. I don't think any of the issues are particularly expensive. There's a trade. Yeah. So, after that is interesting because that's Winnick. And then immediately it goes to Rab dealing with the fallout of that and him trying to bring in the new Corps and dealing with this kind of like sting operation that they're doing on the Black Circle. And in the process of that, Kilowog gets captured, and Ganthet is, a factor. And then we have this little interlude here where Kyle's been in space for a long, long time now at this point, completely not coming back to Earth. And so one of the Guardians that he reinitialized or brought back when he recharged the power core when he gave up the ion power. I think I skipped over that. When he gave up the ion power, he recharged the core and gave birth to the Guardians again, basically. So he's trying to slowly remake the core, which doesn't ever fully get resolved here. I thought this was Hal on the cover, but it's Kyle sending a little, message to Earth to talk to kind of our sidecast, who have all been having ongoing plots. So Kyle kind of, fits in his stuff in the pages between, everyone else doing their thing on Earth. And it's really kind of cool because the Guardian delivering the message is saying, like, this is from a couple weeks ago. It's one of the few times that they actually acknowledge the time space travel takes with the Green Lantern, which I really like because that's kind of a sticking point for me. I think there's a lot to space travel and the amount of time it takes to send messages back and forth, and there's a lot of drama and interesting stories that have been done with that. And to not make that a component whatsoever in Green Lantern for physical travel, much less like a phone call equivalent, is a missing factor, I believe. So, Rab continues, and there was one issue in there where it goes Rab Von Rad, blah, blah, blah. So the handoff is more present. The storylines continue, and what's interesting though, or not, it's Winnick. Sorry, Winnick. Winnick does such a good job with the soap drama stuff, and Rab does really try to continue it. And whereas Rab doesn't have the same panache for dialogue that makes some of that soapier stuff work, he does focus on the superhero stuff a bit more, which he's more suited to. But he also allows the structure in the stories to come through in a way that I think leads to some of the stronger issues. Unlike his bit before, here he has a small run. It's like half a year, and he gets to do ABC plots because he knows he's going to be on it long enough. And I think it's some of the height of this book. I'm really sad that Rab didn't get to continue because he was building to a lot of things. And he used every issue to get further, but he just never has the time other creators seem to get. So he's off dealing with all these kinds of crazy things. He gets some fun, colorful colors on his covers. There's a big fight ultimately, and it plays out, but you can kind of tell in the last couple issues that he has that it peters out, because ultimately we get the final arc of this run, which is Mars is coming home. So Kyle finally comes back from space. And at this point, his assistant's been dropped after becoming like a national spokesperson and dealing with his family accepting him for being gay, all this stuff. He's just done. That's it. We don't see him again, which is incredibly disappointing. The idea of John being the other Green Lantern comes up in a really annoying way. So to kind of get to it, Green Lantern comes back. Jen is now cheating on him, moved on to another relationship, and Kyle finds this guy in his apartment with her, basically, and so that's it. That's how we're reintroduced back to Earth. Thanks, Mars, for just kind of a boner of a way to set it up. I mean, to be fair, Rab and Winnick kind of got the ball rolling on that, but the way this issue's done is just so lame duck. Kyle runs off to the watchtower, realizes that John's doing such a good job that the JLA doesn't necessarily need him, which sucks because Mars already did this story. Kyle should have already grown from this, and now we're rehashing it in a really dumb way that ultimately never actually gets resolved here. But he does run into Jen again, and they officially break up. But then at the last minute, Fatale comes in. Annoying again, and this is what I was talking about earlier. Fatale comes back. This is now the fourth Fatale story. There's only one in which she actually deals with John, and then there's some like lingering plot blitz where she deals with John for a bit. And now she wants to go after John, but she doesn't get the chance because Kyle beats her. And then Kyle tells John about that in the next issue when John and him have a fight to kind of show that he's gotten his stuff as Green Lantern, but he's also kind of off his rocker at the moment, which should be an echo back to where Hal was right before Kyle became the Green Lantern, when he was down on his luck, and maybe showing Kyle getting past that. But we don't really get that basically we get John sitting down with him saying, you should go to your mama and get your head on straight. And then he does. He fucking does. And then Mars pulls the grossest fucking... Okay. I've been through a lot of Green Lantern at this point. I've been through a lot of comic runs in my life. I have comics I like and don't like, but I've never seen a principal writer come back to a book that they did based on their association with the character like that and betray everything, show that they didn't learn anything from the mistakes they did, and just do the grossest possible thing and then peace out. This is some of the... It's so dumb. So Major Force comes after Kyle's mom, and they have a whole thing with the refrigerator. Oh no, he wouldn't shove her in the refrigerator. That would be unoriginal. He shoves her in the stove. At this point, there's no excuse. The whole fridging thing when Mars did it the first time, I didn't want to defend it. I mean, the problem is that it's systemic, not that the story did it at all. And it was such a prime example. Something that Mars did captured people. I'm willing to say, like, it's not great, but as long as he learned and moved on, it'd be one thing. But he didn't learn. He does it again, even grosser, referencing it, and then it's almost of no consequence pages later. Kyle gives up and gives Major Force the ring because he doesn't want to deal with it anymore because he's so heartbroken. Then he's like, nah, takes it back, wins, and then we're off into Green Lantern Rebirth. And that's fucking... We leave Kyle's run with now closing out on his mom getting killed for about no reason other than to try to motivate him to move on. But it doesn't motivate him in any real, tangible fashion. Nor does it set anything up. Nor does it create any drama or lasting stories to move on to. It's just a gross, needless thing that's done. Again, for no reason. There's no motivation. There's no... It's just Major Force being like, I'm killing those people close to you. And then now Kyle is... I don't know if he's part of the Justice League or not. I don't know if he's homeless. I don't know where he stands with John. I don't know if he feels like he got his head on straight. It kind of seems like it, but I don't know. We don't know where the core's at, which is this lingering plot thread that in a way gets resolved, but without Kyle, it feels like. I don't... And Waka Waka, it is the lamest frickin' sign out. It would have just been better for them to just have a couple issues, given Rab a couple more issues and sign it out, not have Green Lantern for about half a year, then do Rebirth. These issues hurt the story and the legacy of what was brought before it. It is so bad. Mars actually calls back on stories that he did that were more popular and makes them worse for rehashing them. It is so ugly. It kind of makes me question how much I really want to hold on to this run. There are their high points, and there is the initial Mars issues, which would be too expensive to kind of want to get back at any point. So if I got rid of these issues, they'd be gone. But, man, I don't know if I want to go through most of this run again. What's the point? It ultimately lands nowhere. There's some highlights. There's some good issues that I think are worth checking out, but... Man, no wonder people thought Johns was such a revelation to Green Lantern. I can't wait to reread it. I can't wait to get to it. I remember some parts. I've forgotten so much. It's been years. I caught up with the Sinestro Corps War, and then I kind of read it as it was coming out, and then I dropped off after a while. That's where I want to be, but I remember so many good stories, and I kind of want to get back to that, and I feel like I'll be able to enjoy it so much more reading them together and not waiting month to month for... As much as I like Green Lantern, there was too much bouncing between two books, and it just kind of got confused, and just being able to read it as a story will be a plus. So, yeah. there we are. Chutzpah. Catch y'all soon with another comic review.